Thank you, Lara. Um, yeah, I think it was '89 actually that we met. Um, yeah, I actually slept on her couch a few times when I was trying to get sober back then. Um, let me set this alarm real quick, and I'm going to start real quick with a retraction. It was pointed out to me that I didn't realize I said this, that we've all relapsed, and that's not true. I thank you for pointing that out. I honestly don't even remember saying it that way, but I do talk a lot and don't actually hear what I'm saying. So thank you for asking me to be here. Um, uh, I spoke last night at Magnolia, so everything's kind of fresh in my mind. That being said, I am 64. I'm less than 5 years away from my last debauch, and I'm a was a blackout drinker. So I'm not the most reliable witness even to my own story. Um, I will do the best to tell the truth. Like Lara said, I've struggled with sobriety. I'm one of those people that, and I heard this, and I really like this. It was a speaker's tape I was listening to, and the guy said that a lot of us relapse before we get here, and some of us relapse after we get here, and that was my experience because I stopped. I tried to stop drinking before I ever came to Alcoholics Anonymous. Uh, and never thought that it was going to be a problem. I thought I could just stop drinking, and obviously years later found that not to be true. But and I've relapsed multiple times uh, um, after I came to the program. I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous way back in 1982. I was stationed in Germany. I was in the military, and I didn't think I had a problem. My ex-wife thought I had a problem. She spoke to my first sergeant. He also agreed that I had a problem. So they forced me to start going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in Germany, of all places. I, my memory's not that great. The timeline's hazy. So I've had short-term sobriety, long-term sobriety. I do have those certain events that in my life that are burned in my brain. Like the very first time I ever tried alcohol, the first time I ever drank. I remember that I was 12 years old. And um, we were. I was standing on the trail out. We lived in Maple Valley, out behind the house, and me and a couple of my friends from school had stole a bottle of MD 2020 from the grocery store, and I remember it was tasted awful, and I could barely hold it down. But once it went down, and we all know that feeling, right? And and I was 12. The first time I ever got in trouble for drinking, I was 13. And my aunt sent me $10 for my 13th birthday, and there was a lady that lived in our neighborhood who was like the cool mom that would buy us alcohol. She would buy kids alcohol, and so everybody thought she was a cool mom. And she bought us a bottle of Black Velvet, and she took half of it as her payment for it, and which is probably a good thing. I probably would have killed myself because me and another friend of mine, and at this time I was 13, and I was a real small kid. My freshman year in high school, I was 4'11". I weighed 77 pounds. So at 13, I was even a lot smaller, and we drank the whole half a bottle between the two of us, and we drank it without no Coke or no chaser. We drank it straight. I thought that was the way you just drank, and I got really really sick, and we were supposed to spend the night at his house, but his sisters got worried that I was, you know, anyway, they ended up taking me home, and I still remember going in the house and my mom just screaming at me like, "What is wrong with you?" And then being in the bathroom the next morning throwing up, and she's standing behind me. I told this is what's going to happen, blah. And honestly, it never really got much better than that. My drinking didn't really change in the fact that the way I drank alcohol is I never drank for the taste. I always drank alcohol for the effect, right? So when I purchased alcohol, it was always like, give me the most that you can give me for the amount of money that I have, right? And that was a pattern that continued through my whole drinking career. I was never uh, a frou-frou cocktail drinker. I drank hard liquor, and then I had to switch to beer because I developed an ulcer, and it was super painful to drink. But yeah, I mean, I always drank for the effect, and 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 I realize this is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I'll try to not talk too much about drugs, but I can't talk about my story without talking about drugs because it's a huge part of my story. And one of the things that I've learned is that it didn't matter what I was taking. I was introduced to drugs in a way that people would just say, "Hey, I have some of this. Do you want to try this?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like, I don't know. Just let me know which way we're going. Are we going up? Are we going down? Are we going sideways? It didn't matter. I was willing to try it. And the drugs that made me feel the same way alcohol made me feel, I continued. And then there was the drugs that I tried and I didn't like, and I had no problem setting those aside. I never really got into meth. I smoked a lot of weed, but I quit doing that because I didn't like the way it made me feel. Right? That's never been the case for alcohol. And that's never been the case for opiates to this day. I know that if I drink alcohol or if I take opiates, it's going to create that effect. And you guys know the one I'm talking about, that sense of ease and comfort that the book talks about, and I started showing up in Alcoholics Anonymous and trying to get sober and couldn't stay sober. I started doing this thing where I moved a lot, because I would, and when I say move, I was talking about like from one state to another. I moved from Washington to California, and the whole premise of that move is to get my stuff together. Like, I kind of burned my life to the ground here. I'm going to move to California, and I'm going to do better in California. And then I get to California, and I'm doing the exact same thing I was doing in Washington, right? And so I burned my life to the ground in California. I started losing jobs, and so I have this great idea I was going to become a drug dealer, right, and make money that way, and don't get high on your own supply, and that worked out about as well as everything else I tried at that period of my life, right? And I remember I had the conversation with. I burned my life to the ground in California. I was going to come back to Washington again. I was set up to go to treatment. My brother was going to let me come stay with him, and I was going to go to treatment up here. And I remember having the conversation with my drug dealer, and he's like, "Yeah, you're a mess, man." He's like, "You really need to get your life together." And I'm, it's like, how far down the scale have we gone that suddenly my drug dealer has become my life coach? Right? Right? He's giving me advice that I need to get and this is a guy who sells drugs for a living, right? So, I, and that was 87. My first time that I got sober and stayed sober was 1992. I went to my final treatment center at the VA hospital. And when I got out of treatment, Kenny, Larry's first husband, was my sponsor. And I jumped feet first into this program. I got a service position. I got a home group. And that's something I apologize. I didn't realize I didn't do that today I have all of those things. I have a service position, right? I have a home group, and I'm the treasurer at my home group. I have a sponsor, and I have guys that I'm working with today. So, and that's what I did in '92. And and this is a story that I hear a lot now. I don't think I heard it so much. I stayed sober from '92 to 2003. And I don't remember hearing that story that much, but I think because now it's part of my story, that I hear in the meetings all the time now about people who had some long-term sobriety and then went back out again. And the story's always the same. It starts with, I wasn't really going to meetings. I wasn't working steps anymore. I didn't have a sponsor. I wasn't checking in with my sponsor. And that's exactly what happened to me. And what happened is my life got really good. I got married. We had a baby. We were buying a house. We moved to Las Vegas. We were going to buy a house. I started a business. I had a new truck. Everything looked great on the outside. But I stopped doing this, right? I stopped showing up. And one of the things that happens when you stop showing up to meetings, you stop hearing stuff like, all we have is a daily reprieve, right? And I forget real quick that I have this disease that if I don't treat it regularly, it's going to kill me. And there's the part in Bill's story where he meets with Abby, and it says that an alcoholic fails to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice, that he's not going to be able to survive the certain trials and low spots, and if he doesn't work, he's going to drink. And in 2002, my brother committed suicide. He was living with, he had moved up from California and was living with me and my wife at the time, and he relapsed and went out on and went back out again, and the relapse was too much, and he came back, and we had a detached garage at our house, and he parked his car in the garage and let it run, and we found him 2 days later, and he had left a note, and it said, "I'm sorry, I just can't do this anymore. It's too hard." He's like, "Please just keep doing what you're doing so you don't end up like me." And that was a while ago, and it's still tough to talk about, but there's a lesson there. And the book says that some alcoholics make that supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. And then a few months after that, my wife left, right? And those are the certain trials and low spots that I think that Bill was talking about, that we're not going to survive if we haven't perfected and enlarged our spiritual life. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't, and I drank again. And I thought that it would be easy to come back because I had 10 years of sobriety, and I had sponsored guys, and I had these amazing spiritual experiences, and I knew what to do to stay sober and, to get sober and stay sober. And my sobriety date today is April 28th of 2020. So there was a lot of years there, and it was, short-term period of sobriety, maybe a couple months here, a couple months there. Sorry, let me just check. I'm doing great. I got 18 minutes left. I spoke last night, and I got 20 minutes in, and I looked down, and I realized I'm still talking about what it was like, or what happened. I haven't even made it to what it's like yet. So I could do 25 minutes of what it was like easily. Anyway, where was I? So I didn't survive those trials and low spots, and I drank again, and it took a long time to find my way back here. And one of the things, and Saul talked about this, and I've shared this with him, because the message that was carried to me is that as long as you're willing to show up and keep reading, I don't care if you're drinking or not, we're going to keep reading. And if you keep showing up, we'll keep doing this thing, right? Because I have this disease that's trying to kill me. And if I'm not, if I'm not trying to, I'm going to die, and I absolutely believe that. I didn't really drink much the last few years of my time out there, because the way I drink now is once I start, it's all bets are off. And then the last 2 times I drank, one was a 4-day bender and the other was a 3-day. And at this time I was a parent, and I had a job, and I just couldn't show up when I drank. What I tried to do, and I be careful the way I word this, because I say that I use opiates to try to manage my alcoholism, right? I thought that I could use opiates to manage my alcoholism, right? Because it's the same thing that happened with alcohol is the same thing that happened with opiates, right? The longer I did it, the sicker I got. And then, in April of 2020, I had developed a habit. Anybody that knows opiates knows that you develop a physical habit too. And when you try to stop taking them, you get really sick. And my next door neighbor, who at that time was my only friend and was also my drug dealer, told me he was out, and I knew I was going to be sick. And so he said, "Hey, I got something I can give you that can hold you over till I get some more." And it was heroin. And I hadn't done any in a really long time, but I thought, I'm going to be sick. I'm willing to try whatever it takes. And I overdosed. It turns out that it was fentanyl-laced heroin, and I was at my apartment, and I did a shot, and I knew that it was too much. I knew that for some reason I made a beeline out of my apartment. I was in my apartment by myself, and I fell down the flight of stairs They were right outside my apartment door, and they found me laying at the bottom of the stairs, not breathing. Thank God, because if that hadn't happened, I probably would have died in my apartment. Um, the really sad thing about that, the tragic thing about this story is that my daughter was living with me at the time, and she came home, and and I was being strapped onto a gurney. They were loading me into the ambulance, and the cops, the police are there by this time, and she's asking what's going on, and I remember hearing the ambulance, the EMT that had been helping me was said, well, I'll let your dad tell you what happened, and she's like, Dad, what happened? And I had to tell her, sweetie, I overdosed, and they took me to the emergency room. She followed, and because of how strong that fentanyl is, like, I kept going back out again. I stopped breathing a few more times while I was in the emergency room, and she was in the room with me, and she witnessed that I had stopped. I would stop breathing, and they would come rushing in, and they Narcan me and wake me back up again, and do all of the fun stuff they do, the sternum rub. Anybody that's ever had that just knows it's just this wonderful thing they do to kind of bring you back out of it. And I remember, this is one of those memories that's burned in my brain. I just shared this last night, and I thought it would be a little bit easier. Riding home with my daughter, and she's crying, and she's like, Dad, what would I do without you? And it's like, it's the people closest to us that get hurt the most by that kind of stuff. And that was the last time I used. I've been clean and sober since April 28th of 2020. And obviously that experience helped give me the willingness to jump back into this thing again. But I believe that this is the way God works in my life. Right after that happened, I was in San Diego painting an apartment building, and I brought a friend of mine down from Washington to help me do the painting. And he was sober again. And this was during COVID. But every morning before we would go to work, he would get up early and he would rent a little scooter and go down to the beach and do his prayer and meditation. And then he would come back and we would go to work. And he never forced anything on me, but he said, hey, I'm doing Zoom meetings. He's like, if you want to come to a meeting tonight, and so I said, sure, I'll start, and one of the first ones I went to was Drunks Rest North, which was a meeting that I helped start back 30 something years ago. And there was people on the meeting, and they saw me, and they're like, is that Alan? And these people were happy to see me, right? And and it was just this, I believe it was a total God shot, and a couple of days later, we did a Zoom meeting. It was Stay Gold, and which would later become my home group, and was my home group for 3 years. This time out, and there was a man who was chairing the meeting, and he was chairing the meeting. It was a Zoom meeting, and he was chairing the meeting from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And this is why I believe that you hear that statement that says that I always get this wrong sometimes, that the teacher will appear when the student is ready to hear the message. And Mike was chairing the meeting, and there was something about his message that felt so familiar. And it turns out that he was part of my old sponsorship lineage. Right? Don Pritz was his sponsor. Right. But I remember after the meeting talking to Jason saying, man, who was that guy? And he's like, oh, yeah, it's Mike. And he was telling me all about him. And he's like, he reminds me of Don Pritz. And he said, yeah, Don was his sponsor. And so I reached out to Mike and asked him if he would sponsor me, and he said, absolutely. And so we started meeting on the phone once a week and reading the book, and I got all the way through, and I got to inventory. And when we got to inventory, he said, lovingly put, we're not going to take 2 or 3 months to write inventory, and I did. And I wrote, and I took a trip to read my inventory to him, to do my 5th step. I flew into Des Moines, Iowa, and drove out to Cedar Rapids. And that was the first time we'd ever met in person. He came to my hotel to listen to my 5th step. And And I know, and you hear this, people are like, I don't really like Zoom meetings. And I know that's not the same. That there's something about meetings in person that are different, but Zoom saved my life, right? And I mean, thank God for Zoom, because look how many people we lost just, and we had Zoom. Imagine if we didn't have and I still do Zoom meetings today. There's a couple that I go to, um, but I flew out and to do my fifth step, and then read him my inventory, and then afterwards he gave me directions for 6 and 7. Get quiet for the hour, and when he's like, when you're all done, he goes, give me a call, and if you want, I'll come back and pick you up, and we can go out to the farm and do some fishing. And I said, absolutely. And so he came back. I did my 6 and 7. He came back and picked me up, and we went out to his. It was actually his mom's farm, and his mom was there, and his wife and his kids were there, and we did some fishing, and they made a bunch of fried fish, and we had some Iowa sweet corn, and I was just, there was a moment, and I'm sitting at the table, and everybody's just kind of interacting and talking, and I was just struck. I was watching everybody do what they do, and I was just overcome with this feeling, and I hadn't had this feeling in a really long time, that I was going to be okay. Like I felt like I'm in the right place right now, doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing with the people I'm supposed to be doing it with, right? And I felt like I'd finally, because it had taken me a long time to make it back here, but I finally felt like I'd made my way back again. And the fifth step promise to say that we've had certain spiritual beliefs, but then we begin to have a spiritual experience. And I feel like that's what was happening. I really felt like, like I was going to be okay. I felt it in my heart that I was going to be, and it's turned out to be true. I got back to, California, and at that time I was living in California. I got back there, and we met that following week, and started in 8 and 9, and uh, I remember leaving. Sunday morning, I drove back to Des Moines from Cedar Rapids, and it was raining, and we know what hard rain is here, right? But I've never in all my life seen rain that hard. I mean, I was on the highway, and I had to slow down to like 20 miles an hour because I couldn't see it was raining that hard, and it scared me. And so when I get back to California and I talked to Mike that week, we're going to, continue on in the book. I go, dude, I've never seen it rain that hard, ever. And he said, yeah, it was just God trying to wash away that huge bag of crap that you left at the hotel back there. Without I mean, literally, like, he just came up with that one, like, boom, like he didn't even think about that. It was but since that day, I've continued to do this, and that's why I believe that this is a daily reprieve, right? So since that day, I've had a home group, I've had a service position, I've had a sponsor that I meet with once a week. We still meet once a week and talk on the phone. We actually started, we do Zoom now. Uh, I work with guys. I actually had a kid last night asked me to sponsor him. I'm working with 4 guys. I had a kid that asked me to sponsor him. I do all my daily rituals. I get up in the morning and I pray. I pray at night, and sometimes I pray throughout the day. Because it tells us, right, that we sometimes we pause throughout the day. We pause when we're agitated and doubtful, and ask for the right thoughts and the right actions. And I continue to do that. I've made amends with my daughter. One of the things that I've learned here is that just saying you're sorry is not enough, right? The book talks about it. It says that there's a long period of reconstruction, and I've had to do that with my daughter so that she doesn't have to worry about me anymore. And actually, it was probably the last time I spoke here. I was going through a breakup, and it was real tough. I was having a real hard time with it, and I flew down to visit with her, and uh, and I know that she could tell that I was sad and I was having a hard time, and so I think she was worried about me, and when I came back, she's sent me this really beautiful care package with a bunch of my favorite stuff in it. And because she's become this really thoughtful person, and she's a lot like her mom in that way. She's very thoughtful. And it was a Saturday morning, and I got a phone call, and I normally don't answer on Saturdays. It's my one day to kind of sleep in. But I knew that it was her calling because I have a special ringtone for her, so I know it's her calling. And so I answered the phone, and I just said, "Hey, sweetie," and she was crying really hard. And so I right away I'm like wide awake. What's wrong? Are you okay? And she asked me. She says, "Dad, are you okay?" And I'm like, yeah, "Sweetie, I'm fine. What's wrong?" And it took her a while before she could tell me that she had this dream that was so real, and that dream she had watched. I died. Right, I didn't live in the emergency room. I died in the emergency room, so the only thing I know how to do to make that right is to just keep showing up. Right, is to keep doing what I'm doing. And I drive to Portland. We have a project down there. I'm a project manager and a superintendent for a paint company now, and I drive down to Portland once a week to check on this project. And I've been doing it since May, like for 9 months now. And the first thing I do when I get in my car and start driving down there is call her. And we have this conversation, and I check in with her, and I let her know I'm doing good. And I'm doing this kind of stuff. I let her know that I was speaking last night and that I'm speaking tonight. And she knows that I'm sponsoring guys, and I go to meetings, and I got this. I wanted to share it with you. I don't think I brought it in. Gosh darn it. I did, and I left it out in the car. I was going to share this with you guys. She just sent me this card. It was for my birthday. And like I said, she's so thoughtful. And she always asks me every, Father's Day, Christmas, birthday, what do you want? What do you want for your birthday? What do you want for Christmas? I'm like, I don't really need anything except one of your cards. Because she sends me these beautiful cards with these beautiful notes in it. And then the one that she sent me for my birthday was just a few months ago. Said, and I'm just paraphrasing, but it was like, thank you for always being there for me and for being this understanding man and this person that I can look up to. And she said, I'm so proud of the growth that I've seen over you in the last few months, in the last few years of your life. Right. And I learned that here from you guys. I learned that from watching you guys. Right. And now I get from practicing these principles, I get to show up and be the kind of man and the kind of father that she deserves to have. Right. And I learned that in these rooms, this way of life that allows me to do that. So when I say thank you for my sobriety, I mean thank you for my sobriety. So that's about it.
Thanks, Alan.